The radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jerking Callahan Reeves from his uneasy sleep. His weathered hand reached for the receiver, fingers trembling slightly as static filled the abandoned broadcasting station. "This is Firebase Mongoose," a woman's voice cut through the noise, desperate and raw. "If anyone can hear this, we have 12 survivors including 4 children. The dead are at our gates. We're located at the old Riverside Mall, south entrance. Please, if there's anyone left out there." The transmission dissolved into screams before cutting to silence. Callahan sat in the darkness of what had once been Seattle's premier news station, now nothing more than a concrete tomb surrounded by the shambling remnants of humanity. At 63 years old, he had watched the world crumble in real time, broadcasting warnings that came too late, watching his colleagues succumb one by one to the infection that swept across the globe like a merciless tide. The fungal outbreak, as the scientists had called it in those final chaotic days, didn't just kill, it reanimated, it consumed, it transformed the living into something nightmarish and relentless. He replayed the message, his journalist's mind cataloging every detail. 12 survivors. 4 children. Riverside Mall was 15 miles northeast, through territory he knew had fallen weeks ago. The smart thing, the survivalist thing, would be to ignore it. Callahan had survived this long by being cautious, by staying hidden in his fortified station with its solar panels and rainwater collection system. He had food for another 3 months, maybe 4 if he rationed carefully. But those children's voices in the background of the transmission, their muffled crying, had awakened something in him he thought had died along with the old world. His own granddaughter Lily had been 4 when the outbreak began. He didn't know if she was alive or one of them now, shambling through some distant street with clouded eyes and fungal growths erupting from her small frame. Callahan stood and walked to the window, peering through the reinforced grate at the city below. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that seemed almost obscene in their beauty, given what the world had become. The streets were a graveyard of abandoned vehicles and scattered belongings, the detritus of civilization's collapse. Movement caught his eye, a cluster of infected stumbling through an intersection 3 blocks away, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, the fungal blooms on their bodies visible even from this distance. The outbreak had started in the Amazon rainforest, or so the reports had claimed. A new species of cordyceps fungus, mutated by illegal dumping of experimental pharmaceuticals, that could bridge the gap to human hosts. It spread through spores and bodily fluids, taking root in the brainstem, killing the host within hours before reanimating the corpse with a singular, terrible purpose: to spread. The infected didn't eat for sustenance. They bit and clawed to transmit the infection, driven by the fungus's biological imperative to reproduce. Callahan had documented it all, broadcasting until the power grid failed, until the government collapsed, until he was the last voice crying out into an empty void. Now, months into this new reality, he had accepted his role as an observer, a keeper of records for a future that might never come. Yet that transmission changed something. He moved to his equipment wall, running his fingers over the map he'd marked with red X's for fallen zones and green dots for possible safe havens. Riverside Mall had been a red X for weeks. If survivors were there, they were either incredibly resourceful or incredibly lucky. Either way, they wouldn't last long without help. He pulled out his supply inventory, mentally calculating what he could carry. His modified Honda truck in the underground garage still had fuel. He'd siphoned enough from abandoned vehicles to keep it running for essential trips. Body armor cobbled together from riot gear and duct tape hung on a rack beside a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire and a Remington shotgun with 47 shells remaining. As dawn fully broke, Callahan made his decision. He began to pack, knowing he was probably signing his own death warrant, but unable to ignore the echo of those children's cries. In a world where humanity had become the minority, where the dead outnumbered the living 1,000 to 1, perhaps the only thing that mattered was refusing to let go of what made you human in the first place. The mission was simple, he told himself. Reach the mall, extract the survivors, bring them back to the station. Simple but not easy. Nothing was easy anymore in this forgotten world where the echoes of the past were drowned out by the moans of the infected. 19 miles away, in the barricaded south entrance of Riverside Mall, Eloan Cross pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the security gate, listening to the dead claw at the reinforcements beyond. She was 31, though she felt ancient now, aged by responsibility and loss. The firearm in her hands, a Glock 19 with 8 rounds left, felt heavier with each passing hour. Behind her, in the dim emergency lighting of what had once been a food court, 11 other souls huddled together, looking to her for answers she didn't have. How long can we hold them? The voice belonged to Dmitry Volkov, a former construction worker whose massive frame was diminished by hunger and exhaustion. His 7-year-old son, Alexei, clung to his leg, eyes too old for such a young face. The boy hadn't spoken since watching his mother turn 3 weeks ago, since Dmitry had been forced to make the choice that no parent should ever face. Eloan turned to assess her group. There was Yuki Tanaka, a medical resident who'd kept them alive through infections and injuries with dwindling supplies and improvised medicine. Beside her sat Rashid Al-Farsi, a software engineer who'd managed to rig solar chargers to keep their radio equipment functioning. The 4 children, Alexei, twin girls named Sage and Saffron who were barely 5, and 10-year-old Marcus Chen, represented both their greatest vulnerability and their most precious responsibility. The others were equally unlikely survivors. Octavia Jones, a retired Marine who'd lost her left hand to an infected bite, amputating it herself before the infection could spread. Tiago Santos, a chef who'd turned the mall's remaining dry goods into meals that sustained both body and spirit. Kenji Watanabe, a high school teacher who kept the children educated and distracted. And Niev O'Sullivan, a veterinarian whose knowledge of animal diseases had proven surprisingly applicable to understanding their undead enemies. We have maybe 24 hours before they break through the eastern barricade, Eloan replied, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The fungal growth is weakening the structural supports. Once they breach there, we'll be surrounded. The transmission, Rashid said, his accent thickened by stress. Did anyone respond? Nothing, Eloan admitted. I've been broadcasting every hour since yesterday. Either no one's left or no one's willing to risk coming for us. Marcus looked up from the tattered book Kenji had given him, his young face set with determination that broke Eloan's heart. We should make a run for it. Go out the north entrance while we still can. Through 200 infected? Octavia shook her head, her remaining hand unconsciously touching the stump of her left wrist. That's not a run, kid. That's suicide. The debate that followed was one they'd had countless times before, circular and desperate. They'd come to the mall 6 weeks ago, drawn by its defensible position and remaining supplies. For a while it had seemed like salvation. They'd established routines, assigned roles, even allowed themselves to hope. But the infected had followed them, drawn by noise and movement, accumulating like a tide that never receded. Yuki approached Eloan quietly, pulling her aside. I need to tell you something, the doctor whispered, her almond eyes shadowed with worry. Tiago has been running a fever since this morning. No bite marks, no visible infection, but... She didn't need to finish. Fever was often the first sign, before the fungal blooms erupted from the skin, before the eyes clouded over, before the person you knew became something else entirely. Eloan felt the weight of leadership crush down on her shoulders. How long before we know for sure? Could be regular illness. Could be the early stage. We'll know within 12 hours. Yuki's hand trembled slightly as she pushed her hair back. If it's the infection, we'll have to isolate him before the violent stage begins. The violent stage. Such clinical words for the horror of watching someone you cared about transform into a monster, watching them attack with inhuman strength and singular purpose. Eloan had seen it too many times, had been forced to put down too many friends, too many strangers who might have become friends in another world. She looked at Tiago across the food court, watching him gently help Sage and Saffron sort through a cache of old coloring books they'd found. The Brazilian chef had been their morale, their reminder that joy could still exist in small moments. The thought of him turning, of having to raise her gun to his head while those kind eyes went milky and dead, made bile rise in her throat. Keep monitoring him, Eloan ordered. Don't tell the others yet. No point in spreading panic until we know for certain. As night fell, the sounds of the infected intensified. They were more active in darkness, some vestigial nocturnal instinct encoded by the fungus. Eloan took first watch, positioned where she could see all the barricaded entrances, her radio close at hand. Every hour she broadcast their position, their desperation, their dwindling hope. She thought about the world before, when her biggest worry had been making partner at her law firm, when the greatest threat was a difficult case or a demanding client. That Eloan cross had died in the first weeks of the outbreak. This Eloan, forged in survival and sacrifice, barely recognized her former self. At 2 a.m., Dmitri relieved her, and she allowed herself 2 hours of restless sleep. In her dreams she heard engines, heard rescue, heard salvation. But when Alexei's scream woke her at dawn, she knew immediately that their nightmare had only deepened. Callahan's truck rumbled through the pre-dawn streets, its reinforced frame and welded protective bars making it look like something from a post-apocalyptic film. Except this was real, viscerally real, and the infected that stumbled into his path were no actors. He felt the sickening thud as the truck's grill connected with a female infected, her body adorned with fungal blooms that had erupted through her business suit. She rolled over the hood and disappeared behind him, already struggling to rise again despite catastrophic injuries that would have killed any living human. The infection didn't just reanimate the dead, it made them horrifyingly resilient. Destroy the brain or sever the brain stem, those were the only reliable ways to stop them permanently. Everything else just slowed them down. Callahan had seen infected continue to function with broken limbs, with massive trauma to their torsos, with injuries that defied comprehension. The fungus didn't need most of the body systems intact, it just needed enough neural tissue to puppet the corpse. He'd been driving for 40 minutes, navigating a route he'd planned meticulously using binoculars and his building's height advantage. The streets were a maze of obstacles, abandoned cars, barricades erected and then abandoned, the occasional crater from the early military response before the government collapsed entirely. The military had tried, dropping bombs on major population centers, establishing quarantine zones. It had all failed. The fungus spread through spores, through bodily fluids, even through contaminated water supplies. There was no containing it, no vaccine, no cure. Only survival. A roadblock ahead forced Callahan to slow down. A jackknifed semi-truck completely blocked the intersection, and going around meant driving through what had been a pedestrian plaza, now filled with stalled vehicles and wandering infected. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling every one of his 63 years in his aching joints. As he maneuvered through the plaza, a child-sized infected lurched toward the truck, its small face covered in the characteristic fungal growths, its eyes filmed over with the milky white of the infection. Callahan's breath caught. It could have been any child, could have been his Lily. His foot hesitated on the accelerator, a moment's weakness that nearly cost him everything. 3 more infected emerged from a collapsed storefront, moving with that terrible purposefulness toward the sound of his engine. One of them, impossibly, horrifyingly, was fast. Not all infected moved with the same sluggish gait. Some, particularly recent infections, retained more motor control, more speed. This one sprinted toward the truck with arms outstretched, fungal tendrils whipping from its open mouth. Callahan gunned the engine, feeling the truck surge forward. The fast one leaped, landing on the hood with a screech of metal. Its face pressed against the windshield, hands clawing for purchase, and Callahan could see the fungal network beneath its skin, pulsing with obscene life. He swerved hard left, then right, but it clung on, one hand smashing against the glass, creating a spiderweb of cracks. He slammed the brakes, and momentum did what swerving couldn't. The infected flew forward, tumbling across the pavement. Callahan didn't wait to see if it would rise. He drove over it, feeling the bump as the reinforced tires crushed the thing beneath them, and kept going. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding his system. This was why he'd avoided leaving the station, why he'd convinced himself that isolation was wisdom rather than cowardice. Out here, death waited at every corner, and his reflexes weren't what they'd been 20 years ago. But turning back wasn't an option. Those children at the mall, those survivors waiting for help that might never come, they deserved better than abandonment. If the world had taught him anything in these months of horror, it was that the moment you stopped caring about other people, the moment you gave in to pure self-preservation, was the moment you stopped being fully human. The GPS he'd modified to work without satellite was guiding him along back routes, avoiding the major highways that had become rivers of abandoned vehicles and roaming hordes. He passed through residential neighborhoods that looked almost normal from a distance, until you noticed the broken windows, the blood stains, the ominous silence where life should have thrived. A movement in his peripheral vision made him glance at a house to his left. In a second-story window, a face appeared, living, not infected. A woman, middle-aged, staring down at his passing truck with an expression of desperate hope. She waved frantically, mouthing words he couldn't hear, pleading for rescue. Callahan's foot lifted off the accelerator. Every instinct screamed at him to help, to add one more survivor to the tally of the living. But he knew the math was brutal. He had limited fuel, limited supplies, limited space in the truck. Taking on additional survivors before reaching the mall would jeopardize the mission. And yet, the thought of leaving her haunted him even as he pressed down on the accelerator again. This was the calculus of survival in the forgotten world. Impossible choices, each one carving away another piece of your humanity. How many people had he watched die through his binoculars, people he might have saved if he'd been willing to risk himself? How many faces would visit his dreams, accusatory ghosts of the abandoned? The woman in the window grew smaller in his rearview mirror, and Callahan forced himself to look forward, to focus on the mission. 12 survivors at the mall. 4 children. That was his objective. He couldn't save everyone. No one could save everyone. That was the hardest lesson of the apocalypse. As he drove deeper into the infected territory, the density of the walking dead increased. They emerged from buildings, from alleys, drawn by the engine noise like moths to flame. Callahan had to constantly adjust his route, looking for paths of least resistance, crushing through lone infected when necessary, avoiding clusters that could trap the truck. The fuel gauge was dropping faster than he'd hoped. The reinforced armor and protective modifications made the truck heavy, inefficient. He'd need to siphon more gas before the return trip. Another delay, another risk. Riverside Mall appeared on the horizon, its massive structure silhouetted against the rising sun. From this distance, it looked intact, almost peaceful. But as Callahan drew closer, he could see the truth. The parking lot was a sea of infected, hundreds of them pressing against the building's perimeter, clawing at barricaded entrances, drawn by the living inside like sharks to blood in the water. He stopped the truck 2 blocks away, staring at the impossible scene before him. There was no way in, no path through that horde. The mall was besieged, and he was just one old man with limited ammunition and even more limited options. For the first time since beginning this rescue mission, Callahan allowed himself to consider that he might have come all this way just to witness the end, powerless to prevent it. Inside the mall, Alexei's scream had awakened everyone instantly, that particular pitch of terror that bypassed rational thought and went straight to primal instinct. Eloane was on her feet with her gun drawn before her eyes fully focused, her heart hammering against her ribs. The boy was pointing at Tiago, who stood in the corner of the food court, his body trembling violently. The chef's kind face was contorted in pain, sweat pouring down his features as he gripped the edge of a table to stay upright. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Eloane could see the telltale signs, the slight discoloration spreading up his neck, the way his eyes had begun to lose their focus, the tremor in his hands that spoke of the fungus beginning its terrible work on his nervous system. "Stay back," Tiago managed to say, his voice strained but still recognizably human. "Please, I don't want to hurt anyone. Yuki, tell me straight, how long do I have?" The doctor approached cautiously, her medical training warring with her survival instinct. She'd seen this progression dozens of times, knew every stage with clinical precision. Hours, maybe less. The fever last night was the beginning. By now, the fungal network is spreading through your neurological system. When it reaches critical mass in your brain stem. She couldn't finish, didn't need to. Dmitri moved Alexei behind him, his large frame blocking his son from the sight. Octavia had already positioned herself between Tiago and the other children, her remaining hand resting on the machete at her belt. The group's carefully maintained cohesion was fracturing under the weight of this new crisis, everyone calculating angles, distances, escape routes. "Isolate him in the storage room," Niev suggested, her Irish accent thick with emotion. She'd grown close to Tiago over the weeks, their shared love of cooking creating a bond. "We can lock it from the outside, give him time to say goodbye properly." "No." Tiago's voice was firmer now, determination cutting through the tremors racking his body. "I won't risk you having to come back and deal with what I become. I've seen it too many times, the violence, the strength they have. If I turn in a locked room I might break through. Might hurt one of the children." His eyes found Sage and Saffron huddled together, their identical faces masks of confusion and fear. "I won't allow that." The implication hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Eloane felt her throat tighten, her professional composure crumbling. "Tiago, there might be another way. Sometimes people fight it off, sometimes." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "We both know that's not true. The infection is 100% fatal. 100% transformative. I can already feel it, Eloane. Feel something else moving in my head, whispering, telling me to spread, to infect." He shuddered, and for a moment, his eyes went distant, unfocused. When they cleared, there was terror in them. "It's getting stronger. Please, before I lose myself completely, before I become a danger to all of you, especially the children, Someone needs to end this. Octavia stepped forward, her face grim. I'll do it. I've done it before, I can. No, Eloan heard herself say. She was the leader. This burden, like all the others, was ultimately hers to bear. I'll do it. But Tiago, if there's anything you want to say, any messages for? She faltered. Who was left to carry messages to? What loved ones had any of them not already lost? Tiago smiled, that same warm expression that had comforted them through so many dark nights. Tell them I tried to stay human until the end. Tell them I chose this, that I wasn't just a victim. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on the children. Marcus, Alexei, Sage, Saffron, you be brave, yes? You survive, and you remember that the world wasn't always like this. You remember kindness and laughter and the smell of good food cooking. Kenji was crying silently, tears streaming down his face as he held Marcus close, shielding the boy's eyes. Rashid had turned away entirely, his shoulders shaking. Even stoic Dimitri had moisture in his eyes as he held his son. Yuki approached Tiago one last time, checking his pupils with a small penlight. The fungal infection had already begun to cloud them, the whites taking on that characteristic milky appearance. 5 minutes, she whispered. Maybe less before the violent transition. The part of you that's Tiago will be gone, and only the fungus will remain. Eloan raised her Glock, her hand steady despite the screaming protest of her heart. 7 rounds left after this. 7 rounds for what came next, whatever that might be. Outside, she said quietly. The others shouldn't have to see. Tiago nodded and began walking toward the service corridor, each step measured, deliberate. He was fighting for control of his own body, fighting the infection that was rewriting his neural pathways, transforming him from the inside out. Halfway there he stumbled, caught himself, kept going. They reached a small office space, relatively isolated from the main food court. Through the grimy window, Eloan could see the horde outside, hundreds of infected pressed against the mall's defenses, waiting with inhuman patience for the barriers to fail. In hours or days Tiago would have joined them, another mindless vector for the fungus's spread. Thank you, he said, his words starting to slur as the infection affected his speech centers. For the weeks here, for the community we built. For letting me cook for everyone, for giving me purpose. His body convulsed, and when he looked at her again, there was something alien flickering behind his eyes. Do it now, Eloan. Please. I can feel it taking me, and I'm so scared of what I'll become. She raised the gun to his forehead, close enough that she wouldn't miss, close enough that it would be instant. Her finger found the trigger, and she forced herself to look into his eyes, to honor his humanity by witnessing this moment fully. You were a good man, Tiago Santos, she said, her voice breaking. You made the darkness lighter. I won't forget. Thank you, he whispered. Thank? The gunshot was deafening in the small space, echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. Tiago's body dropped, and Eloan stood there, gun still raised, watching his blood pool on the floor and knowing that another piece of her soul had been carved away. When she returned to the food court, no one met her eyes. They all understood the necessity, but understanding didn't make it hurt less, didn't make the smell of gunpowder and death any easier to bear. Rashid was at the radio, his hands moving mechanically through the broadcast sequence. Still nothing, he reported. No response to our transmissions, no sign of rescue coming. Outside, drawn by the gunshot, the infected pressed harder against the barricades, their moaning intensifying. The eastern barrier, already weakened, began to buckle visibly under the increased pressure. We're out of time, Octavia said, checking her weapons with practiced efficiency. That shot will have them frenzied. The barrier will fail within hours, not days. Eloan looked at her group, 10 now, not 12. 10 souls depending on her to find a solution that didn't exist, to conjure hope from desperation. The 4 children watched her with eyes that had seen too much, that had been forced to grow up in a world that devoured innocence. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some plan or platitude, when Rashid suddenly straightened at the radio, his hand flying to his headphones. Wait, he said, voice tight with something that might have been hope or might have been delusion. I'm picking up something. A transmission. Someone's out there. Someone's responding. Callahan stared at the impossible horde between him and the mall, his mind racing through scenarios and discarding them just as quickly. Direct assault was suicide. The truck could plow through maybe 20 or 30 infected before getting bogged down in bodies and overwhelmed. He needed a distraction, something to draw the horde away from the south entrance where the survivors waited. The radio crackled to life. Unknown vehicle, this is Riverside Mall. If you're receiving this, we see you. 2 blocks northeast, green reinforced truck. Please confirm if you're here to help. The voice was female, controlled despite the obvious stress, and it sent a spike of adrenaline through Callahan's system. He grabbed the radio handset. This is Callahan Reeves. I received your distress call. I'm here to extract you, but I need to clear a path first. How many mobile adults do you have? Anyone with combat or tactical experience? There was a pause, presumably for consultation. 3 adults with relevant experience. Former Marine, construction worker with demo background, and myself, former prosecutor with firearms training. Plus 5 other adults and 4 children. We need to move all 12. Well, Callahan looked at his truck, calculating space. It would be tight, dangerous, but possible if he could create enough of a window. I need you to create a secondary distraction on the north side of the mall. Noise, movement, anything to split the horde's attention. Give me 10 minutes to position, then make it loud. Understood. 10 minutes. Callahan put the truck in gear and began a wide circle around the mall's perimeter, staying just out of sight of the main horde. His eyes scanned for anything useful, and there, half a block from the mall's north entrance, he found it. A gas station, probably looted for supplies, but the tanks underneath would still hold fuel. Flammable, explosive fuel. The next 8 minutes were a frantic blur of activity. Callahan used a length of rubber hose to siphon fuel from the station's underground tanks, filling empty bottles he'd brought for precisely this kind of improvisation. Old t-shirts from his supply bag became wicks, and his Zippo lighter, a relic from his days as a young reporter when everyone smoked, became the ignition source. At the 10-minute mark, the mall's north side erupted with noise. Someone was banging metal on metal, a rhythmic clanging that echoed across the parking lot. The effect on the horde was immediate. Hundreds of infected began shambling toward the sound, drawn by the promise of living prey, the fungus's biological imperative overriding any vestige of human caution. Callahan lit the first Molotov cocktail and hurled it toward a cluster of vehicles near the gas station. The bottle shattered, spreading flame that caught and grew. He threw 2 more, creating a triangle of fire, then retreated to a safe distance. The explosion, when it came, was magnificent and terrible. The underground fuel tanks ignited in a fireball that reached 3 stories high, the shockwave shattering windows and setting off car alarms across the parking lot. The noise was deafening, the destruction comprehensive, and every infected within visual range turned toward it like flowers following the sun. The horde split, maybe half moving toward Callahan's explosion, the other half still drawn to the clanging at the north entrance. The south entrance, where the survivors waited, was suddenly exposed, defended by only 30 or 40 infected rather than hundreds. Callahan gunned the engine, the truck roaring to life as he aimed it straight at the south entrance. The remaining infected turned toward him, arms outstretched, mouths gaping to reveal the fungal growth within. He hit the first cluster doing 40 miles per hour, feeling bodies crunch against the reinforced grille, rolling under the wheels or bouncing off the armored sides. The truck was a battering ram, unstoppable momentum carrying it through the thinned horde. Infected clawed at the doors, at the windows, fungal-covered hands leaving smears of tissue and spores across the glass. One managed to grab onto the side mirror, pulling itself halfway onto the running board before Callahan swerved and scraped it off against an abandoned SUV. He slammed the brakes directly in front of the south entrance, the truck skidding to a stop mere feet from the barricaded doors. Through the reinforced glass he could see faces, living faces, staring out at him in disbelief. "Open up!" he shouted, though they couldn't possibly hear him over the moaning of the infected and the crackling of flames in the distance. Now, while the path is clear. For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then the barricades began to move, metal scraping against concrete as the survivors pulled away the obstacles they'd so carefully constructed. The door opened, and Callahan found himself face to face with a lean woman in tactical gear, her dark eyes sharp and evaluating. "Eloan Cross," she said, already moving. "We need 30 seconds to get everyone loaded." "You've got 20, Callahan replied, scanning the parking lot. The infected were already reorienting, the ones nearest recovering from the explosion, beginning their inexorable shamble back toward the truck. "After that, we'll be surrounded again." The evacuation was controlled chaos. The former Marine, Octavia, he learned later, moved with lethal efficiency, covering the evacuation with a machete in her remaining hand, dropping any infected that got too close with brutal strikes to the skull. Dmitri emerged carrying his son with one arm while using the other to help herd the other children toward the truck. Callahan had thrown open the truck's rear doors, revealing the modified cargo area he'd created. Benches along the sides, handholds welded to the ceiling, every inch of space utilized. Load from the back, he shouted. Kids first, then adults. Move. Yuki helped boost the 4 children into the truck bed, their small faces tight with fear but no tears. They'd learned that tears accomplished nothing in this new world. Marcus, Sage, Saffron, and Alexei huddled together in the front corner while the adults began piling in. 15 seconds. Callahan could see a wave of infected coming around the mall's eastern corner, drawn by the commotion at the south entrance. Maybe 200 of them, enough to bury the truck under sheer numbers if they arrived before the evacuation completed. Faster. Eloan was directing traffic, counting heads, making sure no one was left behind. Rashid passed her equipment. Radios, solar chargers, the tools of communication they'd managed to preserve. Kenji clutched a bag of books, refusing to abandon them even now. 20 seconds. The last adult, Niev, was climbing into the truck when an infected came sprinting from behind an overturned bus. One of the fast ones, recently turned, still possessing most of its motor control. It covered the distance in seconds, launching itself at Eloan's back. Octavia's machete caught it mid-leap, the blade crunching into its skull with the sound of splitting wood. The infected dropped, truly dead now, but the Marine had overextended. 2 more infected grabbed her from behind, mouths gaping, going for the bite that would spread infection. No. Dmitri dropped his son gently into the truck and charged back, his massive fists becoming hammers as he pulverized the infected attacking Octavia. He grabbed her with one hand and literally threw her toward the truck, where willing hands caught her and hauled her inside. But the delay had cost them. The wave of infected hit Dmitri like a tsunami, 5, 10, 15 of them piling onto his large frame, bearing him down under their collective weight. He didn't scream, didn't cry out. He just roared defiance, still fighting, still buying seconds for the others to escape. Daddy. Alexei's scream was soul-destroying, the boy trying to climb out of the truck, held back only by Yuki's desperate grip. Eloan raised her gun, and Callahan knew what she was thinking. Mercy before the infection could take hold, before Dmitri could become one of them. But the big man was already disappearing under the pile of infected, his final gift to his son measured in seconds of delay rather than rescue. Go. Eloan shouted, slamming the truck's rear doors shut even as she threw herself into the passenger seat. Drive. Callahan didn't need to be told twice. He floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, crushing infected beneath its wheels as it fought for traction. Bodies bounced off the hood, clawed at the sides, but momentum carried them through, carried them away from the mall and the writhing mass of infected that had claimed Dmitri Volkov. In the back, Alexei's screams continued, wordless and infinite, as he lost the last member of his family to the forgotten world's hunger. The truck barreled through Seattle's dead streets, Callahan taking turns at speeds that made the chassis groan, putting distance between them and the mall before the infected could organize pursuit. In the passenger seat, Eloan maintained her composure, but her hands trembled as she reloaded her weapon with mechanical precision. Take the next left, she said quietly. Then the underpass 3 blocks down. It'll mask our sound signature, make us harder to track. Callahan glanced at her, impressed despite the circumstances. You've done this before. Every day for the last 6 months. Running, hiding, surviving. Her voice was hollow, emptied of emotion by the necessity of leadership. It never gets easier. You just get harder. In the back of the truck, the survivors clung to the handholds as the vehicle bounced over debris and abandoned vehicles. Yuki held Alexei as the boy sobbed into her shoulder, his small body racked with grief that had no outlet, no resolution. The other children watched with somber faces, understanding in the way only children of catastrophe could understand. Octavia sat against the wall, her remaining hand pressed against a gash on her ribs where an infected had clawed through her tactical vest. Blood seeped between her fingers, but her face showed no pain, only the 1,000-yard stare of someone processing trauma in real time. How bad? Niev asked, moving to examine the wound with practiced hands. Superficial, Octavia replied. No bite, no infection. Just blood and pain, and I've had worse. But her eyes drifted to the closed rear doors, to where Dmitri had made his stand, and something in her expression cracked. He saved my life. I should have been faster, should have seen them coming. He made a choice, Kenji said softly, though his voice shook. The same choice any parent would make, protecting his child's chance at survival. He looked at Alexei, whose sobs had quieted to hitching breaths. The same choice we all make every day now, prioritizing the children over ourselves. The truck emerged from the underpass into an industrial district, The buildings here mostly intact but ominously silent. Callahan navigated toward his broadcasting station, taking a circuitous route that added miles but avoided known infected concentrations. "Your father was a hero," Marcus said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the engine noise. The 10-year-old moved to sit beside Alexei, putting an arm around the younger boy. "My parents, they turned on the second day. I had to run, had to leave them. But your father, he stayed himself until the end. He chose to save us. That means something." Alexei looked up, his face streaked with tears and grime. "He promised we'd make it. Both of us together. He promised." "And you did make it," Sage or Saffron said. Callahan couldn't tell the twins apart yet. "Because he made sure you would." The wisdom in these children, the terrible premature aging of their souls, struck Callahan with renewed force. They should have been worrying about school and friends and trivial childhood concerns. Instead, they were comforting each other through loss that would have broken most adults, offering perspective that came from having witnessed more death than anyone should see in a lifetime. Rashid, working with his salvaged radio equipment even in the moving truck, suddenly stiffened. "I'm picking up another transmission. Not from the mall, from somewhere else. Multiple voices, sounds like a larger group." "Put it on speaker," Eloan ordered, her tactical mind already working through the implications. Static filled the cargo area, then voices emerged, distorted but audible. "Establishing safe zone at the harbor. Ferries are still operational. We have supplies, defenses, room for survivors. Repeat, this is harbor safe zone, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. We're gathering people for transport to the islands. The infected can't cross water. We're building something new, something that can last. If you can hear this, if you're alive, make your way to Pier 57. We'll watch for you." Silence filled the truck as the message repeated, as hope and skepticism warred in equal measure. Callahan and Eloan exchanged glances, both hearing the same things. The promise of sanctuary, the possibility of community, but also the dangers inherent in gathering large numbers of people, the potential for infection within the ranks, the question of whether any safe zone could truly remain safe. "It could be real," Yuki said carefully. "The islands would provide natural barriers against infected. The Puget Sound is too far to cross for creatures that don't swim, don't think, just shamble. It could also be a trap," Octavia countered. "Or wishful thinking that collapses the moment too many people gather in one place. We've seen it before, false promises, temporary sanctuaries that become tombs." "Pier 57 is 12 miles from my station," Callahan interjected, speaking up from the driver's seat. "We'd need to cross through downtown, through some of the heaviest infected concentrations. With children with limited ammunition, that's not a journey to take lightly. Is staying at your station any better?" Niev asked. "How long can 11 people survive in a building that was designed for one? How long before supplies run out, before the infected find us, before we're right back where we started at the mall?" The question hung heavy, unanswerable because every option carried risk, every choice balanced potential salvation against probable death. This was the arithmetic of the apocalypse. No good options, only degrees of terrible, and the constant gnawing knowledge that any decision might be the one that doomed everyone. Alexei spoke up, his voice small but steady. "My father died so we could live. If we just hide and wait to die anyway, then what was it for? What was any of it for?" Out of the mouths of babes, Callahan thought, came the wisdom that adults had lost to fear and caution. The boy was right. Survival wasn't just about breathing another day, it was about finding purpose, building toward something beyond mere existence. "We rest tonight at my station," Callahan decided. "Regroup, resupply, treat wounds, and get real sleep in a defended position. In the morning we make a group decision about the harbor. Democratic vote, everyone gets input including the kids. Whatever we decide together." Eloan nodded slowly. "Agreed. We've lost too many people to hasty decisions. We do this smart." The broadcasting station appeared ahead, its concrete walls and reinforced windows exactly as Callahan had left them hours ago, though it felt like years had passed since he'd driven away. He pulled the truck into the underground garage, the heavy door grinding closed behind them, sealing them away from the infected world outside. As the survivors climbed out of the truck on shaking legs, as they took in this new temporary sanctuary, Callahan felt the weight of his decision settle onto his shoulders. He'd set out to save 12 people and returned with 11. One life lost, but 10 plus himself still living, still fighting. In the forgotten world, he supposed that counted as victory. Though victory tasted like ashes and blood, and the ghosts of the fallen would haunt them all through the long night ahead. The broadcasting station's emergency lights cast long shadows across the main room where the survivors had gathered, a mismatched family forged in crisis and sealed in loss. Callahan had distributed his supplies, water, canned goods, blankets. Watching these strangers become his responsibility, his community, perhaps even his purpose. Yuki had transformed a corner into a makeshift medical station, treating Octavia's wounds and checking each person for signs of infection with meticulous thoroughness. The children sat together under Kenji's watch, their resilience both inspiring and heartbreaking as they adapted to yet another new environment, another temporary home in a world that offered nothing permanent. Eloan stood at the window staring out at the city below. Callahan joined her, two leaders sharing the burden of command in silence before she spoke. 13 people we started with at the mall when we first arrived. 13 became 12 became 11. The mathematics of survival, always subtraction, never addition. Until today, Callahan countered gently. I was 1. Now we're 11. That's addition in my book. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Optimist or fool? Maybe both. Probably both. He pulled out a worn flask, took a sip and offered it to her. She accepted, the whiskey burning warmth down her throat. I've been thinking about that transmission. The harbor safe zone. And I think we should go. Not because I believe it'll be perfect or even necessarily safe. But because the alternative is waiting here until supplies run out or the infected find us or we turn on each other from cabin fever and desperation. He gestured to the children across the room. They deserve better than just existing day to day. They deserve a chance at something approaching a future. Eloan was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the emergency lights. Dimitri believed that. Died believing it. That his son deserved a chance no matter the cost. She touched the window glass, her fingers tracing patterns in the grime. I've made so many decisions that got people killed. What if the harbor is just another one? What if I lead these people, these children, to their deaths? What if you lead them to life? Callahan turned her to face him. This woman who'd carried the weight of 11 souls on her shoulders and still stood upright. You can't know. None of us can. All we can do is make the best choice with the information we have and live with the consequences. The consequences are written in blood. Tiago's blood, Dimitri's blood, all the others whose names I whisper in the dark so I won't forget them. Then honor them by giving their sacrifice meaning. They died so others could live, so make damn sure those others get a chance to really live, not just survive. Before Eloan could respond, Rashid approached with his radio equipment, his face animated with an excitement they hadn't seen since the evacuation. I made contact with the harbor safe zone. They confirmed they have fortified positions, multiple boats for island evacuation, and a community of over 200 survivors. They're organizing supply runs, establishing agriculture on the islands, even talking about long-term rebuilding. 200 survivors. In a world measured in losses, the number seemed impossibly large, impossibly hopeful. How? Octavia had joined them, her wound bandaged but her skepticism intact. How have they maintained that many people without infection tearing through them? Strict quarantine protocols, Rashid explained. Everyone who arrives spends 72 hours in isolation, longer than the maximum incubation period. They're testing blood samples, monitoring for any signs of infection before integrating people into the main population. It's not perfect, but it's working. The group gathered slowly, drawn by the conversation, by the first real hope they'd encountered in months. Even the children drifted over, their young faces showing cautious interest. We should vote, Kenji said, ever the teacher, ever the believer in democratic process even at the end of the world. Everyone gets a say, everyone's voice matters. And so they did, 11 survivors casting their lots. Some with enthusiasm, some with reservation, but all moving in the same direction. 11 votes for trying to reach the harbor, for taking the chance that something better waited beyond the next horizon. As the group settled in for the night, making sleeping arrangements and taking turns at watch, Callahan returned to his broadcasting equipment. Old habits died hard, and he found himself switching on the transmitter, adjusting the frequency to reach as far as his solar-powered system could manage. This is Callahan Reeves, broadcasting from Seattle, he began, his journalist's voice steady and clear. 4 months, I've documented the fall of civilization, recorded the losses, maintained the ledger of humanity's decline. Tonight, I'm broadcasting something different, hope. He told the story of the rescue, of Dimitri's sacrifice, of Tiago's choice to die as himself rather than become a monster. He spoke of 4 children who'd learned to be brave in a world of nightmares, of adults who still believed in protecting those weaker than themselves, of a community forming from fragments and loss. "We're heading for the harbor's safe zone tomorrow," he continued. "It might work, might fail, might be everything promised or nothing at all. But we're going together and that matters. To anyone still out there, still listening, still breathing, you're not alone. Somewhere in this forgotten world, people are still fighting to hold on to their humanity, still refusing to give in to the darkness." He paused, looking around the room at these people who'd become his people in the span of a single day. The world we knew is gone, dead as the infected that roamed these streets. But the world we're building, piece by piece, person by person, that's still being written. Every day we survive is another line in that story. Every person we save is another chapter. Every moment of kindness, of sacrifice, of simple human decency is a paragraph that says we were here, we mattered, we didn't surrender everything that made us human. Across the room, Alexei had fallen asleep against Yuki's shoulder, exhausted by grief and the day's trauma. But even in sleep, his small hand clutched Marcus's, the children finding comfort in each other. Sage and Saffron lay curled together like puppies, identical even in slumber. These were the echoes that would carry forward, Callahan realized, not the violence, not the loss, but the connections forged in darkness, the love that persisted despite every reason to give up. "Sign off for tonight," Callahan concluded. "If you're out there, if you can hear this, know that we're still fighting. Still hoping. Still human." Callahan Reeves over and out. He switched off the transmitter and found Eloan watching him, something like approval in her expression. "Good broadcast," she said. "Think anyone heard it? Does it matter? We heard it. We know what we're fighting for now." She moved to check on the children one last time, adjusting blankets and brushing hair from small faces with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with her tactical exterior. As night deepened and the city of the dead whispered its secrets outside the fortified walls, 11 survivors rested in the fragile sanctuary of concrete and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, the long journey to the harbor through streets filled with infected and uncertainty. Tomorrow would test them in ways they couldn't anticipate, would perhaps claim more lives before the end. But tonight they were together. Tonight they were alive. Tonight, in a forgotten world that had taken everything, they had found something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth surviving for. Callahan took the first watch, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows, his mind already planning the route to the harbor. Beside him, Eloan sat in companionable silence, two souls bound by the same impossible responsibility. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly. "Honestly? I don't know. But I know we'll try. And in this world, trying is everything." Outside, the infected moaned their endless hunger, shambling through streets that once rang with human laughter and ambition. The world had fallen, civilization had crumbled, and most of humanity had been reduced to mindless vectors of fungal infection. But in one fortified building, 11 people refused to accept that ending. They were echoes of the forgotten world, remnants of what had been, seeds of what might still become. Their story was written in scars and losses, in sacrifices and small victories, in the simple act of continuing to care about each other when caring had become the hardest thing in the world. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed almost obscene in their beauty, Callahan allowed himself a moment of something that might have been peace. They would leave soon, would make their desperate bid for the harbor, would face whatever horrors waited on the road ahead. But for this moment, in the quiet space between night and day, they were simply human beings who had not yet surrendered, who had not yet forgotten what it meant to hope. And in the echoes of the forgotten world, that would have to be enough.